Okay, welcome to another Orbiter 2010 video. And in this video I'm here at KSC, and what you're looking at is the Falcon Heavy launcher, and I have attached to the launcher the XR2 Ravenstar. Now a little bit about the Falcon Heavy. As far as I know, it doesn't actually exist yet. This is actually one of the upcoming launchers. Right now they just have the Falcon 9, but I do believe this is in the works, and I'm not sure when the first mission for the Falcon Heavy is going to be, but it's coming in the future. So my point is that this is a realistic, real-world launch vessel, or at least it will be in the not-too-distant future. The XR2 is technically realistic payload in the sense that the Falcon Heavy has the lifting capability to put this much mass in orbit. Now, in terms of aerodynamics and all of that, it's a bit questionable as to whether or not this could possibly survive a vertical launch, but we won't really address that here. But you can actually load up the XR2 to its maximum capacity with full crew, with full RCS, full APU, full main engine fuel, plus the crew habitat module, plus 2 cargo payload, like if you want to carry cargo LOX or 2 main fuel, whatever. You can completely max out the XR2, and the Falcon Heavy can still launch it into orbit. The lifting capacity of the Falcon Heavy is 53,000 kg according to the documentation, and a fully loaded XR2 comes in under that by about 10%. So this is actually set up in preparation for a mission that I'm currently recording, and I don't know when all of that's going to get uploaded to my YouTube account. I'm recording this video April 29th, 2013. But before I upload that video, the one that I'm currently recording, I want to upload this one that shows how to set this up so that if you want to follow along, you can follow along, or just in general, if you want to know how to manage payload on the Falcon Heavy, then you can do that. Of course, this would apply also to the Falcon 9. So let's get on with that. So first thing I'm going to do is exit Orbiter, and I'm going to load a different scenario so that we have a common scenario. When you download the SpaceX add-on in the Dragon, it comes with this folder of scenarios, and inside of that folder there's the Falcon Heavy folder, and there's one scenario in here called Falcon Heavy -LC40 launch. So I'm going to launch that now, and that makes a good starting point. It's like a template that we can use to make a different scenario. So now that I've got that loaded, you can see here that we're looking at the exact same thing, but instead of having the XR2, what we have here instead is a dummy payload, and then it's covered up by the fairing. Now I want to mention over here these controls that we see, this white text. To get rid of this text, press the W key, and then when you need it, if you need to see it again, press QW, and that will bring it back. So W to hide it, and then QW will bring it back. A quick mention about the DX D39 client that I'm running here. It seems to have a issue, or I'm not sure if it's an issue with the client or an issue with the SpaceX add-on, but when you manage the payload, it's supposed to make the fairing transparent so that you can see inside of the payload area. That doesn't work with this client. Apparently, if you have the DX7 client, just the inline, then when you press P to edit the payload, it makes it, well, it makes at least one half of the fairing transparent. But since that doesn't work with this client, we're actually going to start just by pressing Shift J to jettison the fairing. And again, I know that command, if I press QW, it tells me here jettison fairing by pressing Shift J. So what we are looking at is just a dummy payload. This is just mass, basically a big pile of lead or concrete or whatever it is, I don't even know. It doesn't do anything. It's not a satellite. It has no functionality. It's just a dummy payload so that you can launch something into orbit using the Falcon 9. Now, the way that we kind of manage the payload is we go into the payload editor mode. And again, if we don't know what command that is, we can press that QW to bring these controls back up. And we see that it says pressing P is how we manage the payload. Now, before I do that, I want to mention that the SpaceX add-on, the Payload Manager, is unbelievably fragile. I can't even stress enough how fragile the payload editor is. In fact, I wish the guy had spent a little bit more time making sure that it wasn't so easy to break. It does work, but you have to make sure basically that every single keystroke is correct. There have been times when I've been working with the payload where I accidentally press Y instead of U, which we'll see here in a moment, and it just completely crashes orbiter. It doesn't tell you that the command is invalid or anything, it just flat out crashes. So, I'll take a sip of water there. So while we're out here, we're basically safe. You know, we're within the orbiter engine, and orbiter is pretty robust. If we press an invalid key, it doesn't crash orbiter, obviously. But the second that we press P to enter this payload editor mode, you really want to think about it like walking on glass or something. So here we go. I'm going to press P. Now I'm in the payload editor mode. Any incorrect thing I do at this point will crash orbiter. The way that we manage this piece of payload here, there are just basically two keystrokes, U and D. U moves the payload up, and D moves the payload down. And if we kind of zoom in here a little bit, like that, we can kind of get an eye-level view of where the payload is at with respect to the stage 2. And if I just press U like maybe 2 more times, you can see there's a little bit of air there between the bottom of the payload and the top of the launch, the top of stage 2. Now, as far as I know, you could launch the payload into orbit even if there appears to be some air in there. To the very best of my knowledge, it doesn't actually matter if the payload's touching the stage 2 or not. In fact, I think this would work as well. If I'm pressing D and holding it down, it's putting the payload so that it's kind of, you know, appears to be inside of stage 2. Now, you wouldn't want to do that because obviously aesthetically and in terms of realism, it just wouldn't look right. So what we're trying to go for here is to just adjust the payload so that it looks like it's just barely touching the stage 2, and that's what we want. And then once we have that, we can press P to get out of the payload editor mode and then breathe a sigh of relief because we're no longer worried about orbiter crashing at the drop of a hat. And the only reason I really bring up the UD part here is because we need to know how to do that for our other payload, the payload that we're actually going to be using. We don't care about this cylinder. We don't want it. What we do want is something that might be more fun or more useful to put into orbit. Now, the payload editor doesn't have a way to just delete the payload, but that's okay because the payload is just a object And like any other object in Orbiter, you can manage it with the scenario editor. So I'm going to press Control F4 and then go to the scenario editor, or you can also press F4, then go to Custom, and then go into the scenario editor. I just prefer Control F4 because it's shorter. If I recall correctly, the scenario editor has to be enabled in modules, so before you launch Orbiter, you want to go into the modules in the launch pad and make sure that you have the scenario editor enabled. Once I have the scenario editor up, I'm actually going to select the cylinder, and then I'm going to delete it. And when you do that, it automatically reselects a different object and makes the camera go weird. And we also want to delete these fairings. We're not going to use them. So delete that fairing, and now it automatically reselects the Falcon Heavy, which is fine. So just kind of get your camera set back how you want. Now there are two ways to add payload, and I'll try to cover both of them. One of them that might be easier would be to use the scenario editor to create the object, and then we'll use the payload editor to add that object to the Falcon Heavy. And I think this method's a little bit easier, so I want to show it first. So we'll use the scenario editor. We'll go to New, and let's use the Delta Glider first. So we'll put in DG, -01. That's the normal naming convention. And then we'll come down here and select Delta Glider and hit Create. And that puts a Delta Glider in orbit around the equator, I believe. And it puts the camera focus on it. So what we actually want to do is, we're done with that. Press F3. We want to make sure that we have the Falcon Heavy selected. And then, OK, so it's selected. It's very, very unstable. So let me relaunch and just go through that part again quickly. This will just take a second because I don't have to explain anything this time. So once the scenario comes up, I'm going to press W to hide those controls, Shift J to jettison the fairing, Control F4 to bring up the scenario editor, and I'm going to delete the cylinder, delete the fairing, delete that piece of fairing, hit New, type DG-01, Delta Glider, create, and now we're right back where we were before. Now F1 to draw, F1 to get focus back on the Falcon Heavy. Now to add that Delta Glider to the Falcon Heavy, we need to go back into the payload editor mode. And remember, when you're in the payload editor mode, anything you do wrong will crash Orbiter. So P to get into the payload editor mode, then we press the letter Y, and it says choose a vessel to attach as payload. So we type DG-01, hit enter, and notice that when we hit enter, nothing immediately happens. That's because we have to press Y one more time. Now we're still in the payload editor mode, so we can adjust the Delta Glider up and down as needed. So if we would like it to have it down here, which is, silly, it doesn't look good, then we can press D. But we kind of want to have it more up here so that it's sitting on top of stage 2. Maybe if we kind of zoom in a bit and adjust the camera, we can decide exactly how we want it to sit. Obviously right now it's floating, we don't want that. So maybe if we push down a few times so that it kind of looks normal. Now I'll press P to get out of the payload editor mode. And there we have it. We have a Delta Glider mounted on top of the Falcon Heavy. And this is, having these winged vessels mounted on launchers is pretty normal. But this particular style of mounting it right on top of the stack may be less than realistic. There's one launcher I know of called DG launcher, and it looks somewhat similar to this, but instead of having the vessel on top of the stack like that, it does more of a space shuttle configuration where it puts the Delta Glider XR2 or whatever down here next to the boosters, so that it's kind of more like the way the space shuttle looks. Now there's still some more stuff to cover, so please don't tune out just yet, because we're in this configuration. This still will not work. It still will crash orbiter badly, and so I just want to address what we still have to do. But once we have the Delta Glider mounted, what we can do is press Control S to save the scenario, and let's exit out. And let me just show you what happens if we try to load that scenario. So we'll go to our quick save, and we'll select Falcon Heavy LC-40 launch 001. That's the quick save for the scenario that we just made. And you'll notice when orbiter comes up, the Delta Glider is nowhere to be seen. If we press F3, we can see that it does exist in the scenario, so why doesn't it appear on top of the stack? Well, I'll show you why. Let's exit out of orbiter. What you have to do at this point, and it's a bit unfortunate that it doesn't do things correctly, but it's just the way it is. You need to edit that quick save scenario. So bring it up in some kind of notepad. And there are like 2 or 3 things that we need to do here, but it's simple stuff. When you quick save the scenario, it puts the payload, which in this case the Delta Glider is the payload, it puts it at the bottom or at the end of the scenario. If you look at the documentation for the SpaceX launcher, it's no offense to the guy that wrote it, but it's not very well written. But it does have this brief note down here that says, important, a payload scenario entry must be between the LPAD and the LV entry. And LV means launch vehicle. And the launch vehicle is either the Falcon Heavy or the Falcon 9. So FH, this line here, this is our launch vehicle. Or if you have the Falcon 9, then this would say F9. So what the documentation says is the payload has to be between here and here. And when you do the quick save, unfortunately, it puts the payload down here. So the first thing we want to do is move this part. So we'll just Control X and we'll put it here. So now we have the payload between the LPAD and the launch vehicle location. And anytime you do stuff like that, you kind of want to make sure you clean up any white space. So if you have extra lines in there like that, delete those. I've found, I believe actually, if you have extra space like that, orbiter won't parse the scenario correctly and it crashes. I've had situations where just by simply having extra spaces in my ship's areas cause crashes. So just FYI on that. Now there's one other thing that we need to do, but before we do it, let me just save this and show what happens now if we try to launch the scenario like that. And this, unfortunately, is nowhere to be found in the documentation. I just discovered this on my own. So we'll go back to orbiter, go back to the orbiter launch pad, and we'll try to launch that scenario now that we've moved the payload so that it's between the launch pad and the launch vehicle. And you see it crashes, and you don't know why. You moved the payload, and the documentation says to put it there. But what I found is that when you do the quick save, it adds this line where it says attached 0:1, FH. And I've found 2 ways to fix the problem. Number 1 is to just delete this line which is fine. You can do that. What I think may actually be better is to change this to 0, 0. And the reason I say this might be better is because if you change this, if you delete the line completely, the scenario will load, but then when you do a quick save, it's going to add that line back in. Fortunately, when it adds it back in, it adds it correctly. It adds it as 0, 0, but since that's the case, I think it's probably better just to change it to 0, 0 here. So now we'll save that. And finally, we have a functional scenario. So let's go back to the quick save folder and launch that scenario. And there we have it. So that's how I got the XR2 mounted on top of the Falcon Heavy launcher, and it works pretty well. It's pretty cool. And you can hopefully understand why I wanted to make this video and why it's quite long. It's already 20 minutes. But there's just a lot that can go wrong, and if you have to figure this out on your own, you'll spend hours and hours and possibly days, and possibly have to go to the forums and ask questions. Whereas by hopefully making this video, I'm showing you all the things that you could potentially run into as problems. But let's just, for the sake of being complete, I do want to go through the process 1 or 2 more times, because I like to show examples, like when you're in school and you do lots of math, addition. It's not the case that you don't know how to do it. The teacher gives you 10, 20, 30 problems to solve, because doing it repetitively kind of drills it into your mind. So let's go through the whole process quickly, but we'll do it one more time. Let's go to the SpaceX folder, go to Falcon Heavy, and let me just close that out. We'll launch that scenario. Remember, this is the default that comes with the orbiter, or comes with the SpaceX rather. W to clear those controls, but you don't have to. Shift J to jettison the fairing. Control F4, scenario editor. Delete the cylinder. Delete the fairing. Delete that fairing. New. And this time we'll do the XR2. Come down the list, select XR2. And to save a little bit of trouble, if you uncheck set camera and hit create, then it puts the XR2 in orbit, and it keeps the focus down here on the Falcon Heavy. So now we're done. Close. Now we want the payload editor mode, so we press P, then the letter Y, and if it echoes that character, make sure you delete it. So XR2-01, enter, press the letter Y again, which attaches the vessel. Now use the letter U and D to move the payload up and down so that it is in a place where you like. And I'm just going to say that that looks good. So P to get out of payload editor mode. Control S to quick save the scenario. Now we'll exit back out. Now we have to edit that scenario so that it doesn't crash orbiter and cause problems. So open with Notepad, and again, the couple things that we have to do. We've got the landing pad here. We have the launch vehicle here, which is the Falcon Heavy. We have to move the payload so that it's between those sections. And the XR2 is a bit longer, so we need to, move all of this stuff. And you don't have to move the payload bay, but I do it anyway. It's up to you. So we move all the XR2 stuff here. Then we also have that attached thing that we have to do. See here it says attached 00, or rather 01. We have to change that to 00. Now we're done. Save. Close it out. Now when we come back to the quick save and launch orbiter, we will have the XR2 mounted on top of the Falcon Heavy. And there we go. And then of course to launch, just simply, select the FH and do your launch. Now, that is just one way to add the payload. I think that way may be a little bit easier. Believe it or not, it's crazy that you have to go through all those hoops, but there is another method, and I just want to show very quickly. Let's press Control F4, bring up the scenario editor, and let's delete the XR2 stuff. So we'll delete that and delete that. Now if we bring up the controls, QW to see our controls over here, if we press P to manage payload, you'll see that it gives us another option. Instead of attaching an existing vessel as payload, you can load a vessel from the disk. And it even kind of warns you here that an incorrect CFG will cause crash to desktop. And I really got to wonder, like, why couldn't they just add an extra line of code that would say, if you type something wrong, then, it just does a little bit of error checking. I don't know. Anyway, so we're in the payload editor mode. So we'll press E, and now it says choose a name of a CFG file. Let me show you what the names of the CFG file are, and hopefully I can Alt-Tab out without crashing Orbiter. If you go to Orbiter directory and go to Config Vessels, this is what it's talking about in terms of the CFG files. Can't even Alt-Tab out without it crashing. That's crazy. So we'll go back in here in a second. But this is what it's talking about. Any of these objects basically can be added as payload, like the Delta Glider.cfg, XR2, the Hubble Space Telescope, and so on. So that's how you can know not only what CFG files you have available to you, but what their names are. So let's run through that real quick. SpaceX, Falcon Heavy, Shift J to jettison the fairing, and scenario editor, delete the cylinder, delete the fairing pieces, and now we'll do the other method of adding payload. P for payload editor mode, the letter E. Now choose the name of a CFG file. We'll put HST for the Hubble Space Telescope, and you don't actually type .cfg, you just type the HTST part. Hit enter, and as before, it doesn't put it there immediately, so you have to hit E again, and now it wants the name of the vessel, so we'll put HST-01, hit enter. Notice there's still nothing there. You have to hit E one more time. So for that one, it's like EEE, whereas the other one is just YY. But now we're still in the payload editor mode, so we need to, I was going to say we need to adjust our payload, but Orbiter just froze on me. So it's, again, it's just a very fragile editing system. So I'm going to have to hit X here because Orbiter's not responding. Just give me one moment. And I will try that one more time. I'll just use a different vessel, and if it doesn't work, then I'll give up, and I just want to have one last bit of information, and then I'll end the video. And I do apologize that it's a longer video here for this explanation, but as you can see, there's just a lot to explain here, just because it's so fragile. And if you try to figure all this out on your own, you'll go insane. So let me close that. All right, finally. Launch Orbiter, and I don't blame Orbiter, by the way. I think it's that add-on. It's just very unstable. I've had lots of problems. Like if you watch my free return that I did with the Dragon capsule, you saw that crash to desktop that I had. during that flight. Anyway, Falcon Heavy, there we go. Launching orbiter. Shift J, jettison the payload. Scenario editor, delete the cylinder. Delete the fairing. Delete the fairing. Now we're going to P for payload editor mode. E to add a new vessel. And we'll just do the Delta glider. Delta glider. E again to give it a name. DG-01. And then E again to actually add it. Now U and D will position it where you need it to be positioned. Like so. And about right there. And P again to get out of payload editor mode. So that gives you an alternate way to add payloads. So instead of going through the scenario editor, you can do that method. But again, I actually think the scenario editor is easier, and it seems to be at least a little bit more stable. So then we would Control S to save that. Then we'd have to exit back out. And I'm not sure how many problems there are with adding payload that way, because I haven't actually done it before. So let's see what the configuration file looks like. Yeah, it still does the same thing. That is, it puts the payload down here where it's in the wrong order. So you still have to move the payload even if you do it that way. And I have no idea what that is, but I'm guessing it's a CDT waiting to happen. So I would delete that and do attach to 0:0. And then hopefully that would be everything. So save that, close it, and we'll see if we can launch that scenario successfully. And if you're still with me, please hang around a little bit longer. There's a couple more things I want to say about all of this. Okay, yeah, there we go. It's odd that the Delta glider isn't in the position that I told it to be in. So we could P to go to payload editor mode, and then D to bring it down a little bit. Like that, and P again to get out of payload editor mode. Save that. One other thing, hopefully I think this is the last thing I want to talk about. If we edit the scenario file, there's just a couple things I want to draw your attention to. When you're looking at the launch vehicle section, there's this config line here, and I don't know what all these mean. I've kind of looked around in the documentation, and I don't think it actually tells you what these mean, but I've found that the fairing portion is this one. It's number 4. So right now it says 0, config 0000011. If you toggle this 0 over to 1, then you will have the fairing. So we'll do that real quick. We'll toggle that to 1, and we'll save it. Now we'll launch that scenario, and then I'll explain why that may be important for you once that comes up. So here you can see now we've got the fairing, which doesn't look right, obviously, for having the Delta glider, but that's how you make sure that you have the fairing in your scenario, is by toggling that one line. Of course, I'm just going to hit Shift J to get rid of it for now. And I still don't have the XR, or I still don't have the Delta glider quite the right place. So there we go. But the reason you might want to know about how to have the fairing enabled or disabled is, suppose you're not using a winged vessel like the XR2 or Delta glider. Suppose you have a satellite, or even that cylinder payload thing. In that case, you would want to cover your payload with a fairing. So I don't know if I can get away with this. Let me try it. Actually, one second. Let me look up the name of that cylinder. Is the LC40. can't remember the exact name of it. Actually, I think it may have just been called Payload. So let me just give this a shot real quick, and hopefully it won't crash. We'll go to Control F4, and we'll delete the Delta Glider and delete those fairing sections. And I'm going to press P to enter payload editor mode, E, and then the name of the payload I want is SpaceX. It's the SpaceX directory / payload. Then E, and we'll just call it P, like that. Then E again. And that wasn't right. I didn't get the name right. So anyway, and that's gonna cause Orbiter to crash because I got it wrong. So we'll close that out. That part doesn't really matter, but if you ever have a satellite, let's take a look at that scenario. If you're mounting a satellite instead of a winged vessel like that, you may want to know about that line and that config section. Just change that 4th digit over to 1, and then that will put the fairing there. Now, the very, very last thing that I want to say about all of this is what might be easier than doing all that stuff inside of Orbiter is to just edit the text file. That I actually think it's a lot easier, and let me show you how to do that. Because when you edit the text file, you don't have to worry about Orbiter crashing on you constantly. The only reason I wanted to show how to do it inside of Orbiter is because it's graphical, and you can kind of wrap your head around what's going on a little bit easier when you can see the graphics. But what you can do is just go to that directory, SpaceX launch vehicles and Dragon, and take this scenario. And what I like to do is to make a copy. I never edit original scenarios. And then I have my own directory set up called My Scenarios. And then I would just throw a copy of that here in my temp folder. And then what I would do, I would edit it. First of all, let me rename it. Call it Falcon Heavy My Scenario, just to make it stand out. And then we'll just open that scenario in a text editor. And we have to do this anyway, right? Even when we do all that stuff inside of Orbiter and we quick save, we still have to come here and edit the text file anyway. So it makes more sense to me just to start here in the first place. What we need to do, or what we want to do, this is our section. That's our payload, and we don't want the cylinder payload, so we'll just delete that, and then we decide what we want to have as payload instead. And we can go to any of our orbiter scenarios, like let's just do something silly. Let's put the shuttle A as payload, which is really dumb, but let's just do that. So we can open up any shuttle A scenario, and we'll find the shuttle A. Here it is, and we'll just copy that section. So Control C, and then we'll come back to that scenario and we'll paste it here, because remember, it has to be between the LPAD and the Falcon Heavy. It has to be in between. And then we come down to the Falcon Heavy section, and it wants to know the name of the payload, and the name of the payload is SH-03, which is the shuttle A. Let me just take one look at this real quick. And here, the config line, I'm going to turn off the fairing, because obviously if we have the shuttle A's payload, it doesn't make any sense to have the fairing enabled. So I think I did everything that I needed to do there. So let's save that. Let's launch Orbiter. Go to My Scenarios, Temp, and it's Falcon Heavy My Scenario. And hopefully this doesn't crash. I think I did everything that I needed to do. Yeah, there we go. So you can see that's kind of a silly idea as putting the Shuttle A as payload, but nevertheless, it worked the first try. Without messing with all the payload editing and scenario editing. So I think that's actually a bit easier just to do it that way. Page 3 of the SpaceX documentation gives you a little bit of information on this. So if you run into trouble remembering, maybe come here and look at this page. And it's not extensive or exhaustive. It definitely doesn't tell you what all the pitfalls are, but at least it gives you a little bit of information. Like you have to press the E 3 times in order to get that payload edited, or Y 2 times to edit the payload that way. So that's it. I think I covered everything. If you have any questions, go ahead and leave your questions down below. And again, the reason that I'm making this video for how to edit the payload on the Falcon Heavy or Falcon 9 is because I'm currently recording a mission where I've done just that. I've actually put the XR2 on top of the Falcon Heavy, and I'm launching it up into orbit for a mission, and you'll see all about that when I get around to recording that video. So it was timely. It was timely to make this. But also, just in general, it's a cool thing to know how to do if you want to use the Falcon Heavy or Falcon 9 to put your own custom payloads into orbit. Maybe you go to Orbit Hangar and you download a satellite and you want to know, well, how can I get this satellite in orbit? Well, you get it into orbit by putting it, attaching it, mounting it onto some kind of launcher. And there are other launchers. There's, SpaceX isn't the only game in town. There's also the Delta 4, which is a pretty good one. There's that DG. There's a bunch of them. If you go to Orbit Hangar and just click on launchers, there's a ton of them. So, sorry this went on for so long, but again, there was just a lot to cover because there are so many things that can go wrong when you're trying to attach payload to that, to the Falcon Heavy. So, that's it, and I will see you in the next video.